I guess we'll go ahead and get this started. First of all, I want to say thank you, and welcome. And thank you so much for coming out. First, each and every one of you are going to be what makes the difference in the next elections and in the years to come in the future. What I want you to do right now is just look to your left and right and introduce yourself, because we need to start building community in Douglas County and building community across the state and knowing each other. So go ahead and say hi.
Hello, I'm Bridget Parker.
How you doing?
Okay, hopefully everybody's had a chance to exchange names and exchange information too, and stay in touch and collaborate and cooperate, because that's what's going to make the difference. Like I said, I'm Isaac. I'm a retired Marine. I live up in Parker since June, and I'm a CU grad, and I've got 3 kids in the Douglas County school system, and I'm here at this town hall. And like I said a minute ago, I wanted to thank you all for coming out, because the subject of this CD4 town hall for our lives is probably one of the most controversial and one of the toughest subjects to address in the political atmosphere that we're in today. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for your courage and for your willingness to come out and address this very controversial, tough subject, but very necessary conversation that we need to have. And I think that that's what we're all here for today, to have that necessary conversation about specifically the availability of firearms and ammunition in our society, and whether or not we need to keep it the way it is and rubber stamp the occurrences that have happened in our country over the past years, or if we want to change direction. And that's what this town hall is all about. So thank you all for coming, and I wanted to thank all of the organizers that put this event together. In less than about a week and a half, we turned nothing into a town hall. So thank you all.
I'd like to start. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'd like to start by saying that I'm honored to be standing here before you today, representing students from all across the district.
Put the mic up by your mouth.
Closer? Okay. I wish it had been under better circumstances. But my name is Katie Lee. I'm a 17-year-old high school student at Legend High School in Parker, and I'm a student organizer and representative for today's town hall. And I'd like to thank all the candidates for attending today and giving their time to talk about the issue of gun violence and the #NeverAgain movement. And I'd like to thank them. You can come take your seats if you'd like.
So at this time, candidates, you can come up front. Okay, really briefly, I think we're all Democrats mostly here, or at least we're reasonable independents or reasonable conservatives that want to make a positive difference in our civil discourse in society. And with that being said, I think that we just need to make sure and be courteous to each other. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about are emotionally charged, and we need to be courteous and keep level heads and have productive conversation rule the floor, and that's what we want here today. So just be civil to everybody and let logical discourse rule the floor. And Katie's going to go ahead and introduce the candidates. And
All right. So we have group. Julia. Alright. Dr. Chase Coney and Dr. Karen McCormick. Michael Huff, Elizabeth House. Simone Aiken, and then Trish O'Neill, who is exploring running for Senate in 2020.
And as we go through the questions, when you answer your first question, candidates, can you just go ahead and let us know who you are? And then after that, we can proceed with the questions. This is kind of our agenda, just so all of you guys know what's going on and we know what's going on. It makes it easier. We got questions and guest speakers intermingled. And then at the end, we got a section for student comments and our conclusion. And at this time, we're going to go ahead and show a short video to kick off the town hall, and then we'll start into the questions. After we have our first speaker, Tom Mauser, speak.
Starting over.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. My name is Tom Mauser, and I am the father of Daniel Mauser. He was one of the students killed at Columbine High School in 1999. I've been fighting for stronger gun laws ever since then. I'm very encouraged by what I see with this new movement. I noticed that a number of you are from my generation, and as I said at the March for Our Lives event in downtown Denver a couple weeks ago, our generation has failed our young people. We have to show them the support and work with them to do something to change it. Because as I've heard some students say, we feel like we're going to be the mass murderer, the mass shooting generation. And they don't want to be that. And I think we have to do something to help them change that. I've been working on this issue for these past almost 19 years. Let me tell you, one of my basic philosophies, one of the most important things to me about this issue, I think people have to keep in mind, is that most Americans, the majority of Americans, support a right to bear arms. Maybe you don't, but the fact is, most Americans do support a right to bear arms. The reality also is that the majority of them also support the need for restrictions on those rights. Most Americans are in the middle of this issue. So why can't we see more progress then? You saw the figure up here, hopefully. It was on Fox News. 91% Americans supporting stronger background checks, universal background checks. And yet, we don't have such a law being passed, do we, America? Unbelievable. So where are you? Are you asking your representatives, especially the ones in Washington, if 91, some polls go as high as 97%. If 97% of people support something, why don't you?
Because the NRA spent $30 million.
I agree to a point, yes. We can say that the NRA is so strong we can't do anything. I refuse to be that fatalistic. We can do something about that.
Single issue.
We have to do something about it. And a part of it is because there are, as somebody said, a lot of single issue voters out there. Well, then some of us, more of us, have to become single issue voters too. Because until people lose their jobs about this issue, nothing will change. Once people lose their jobs, something will change. So one thing that I would like to especially promote right now in this sort of period is something called a red flag law. How many have heard of the red flag law? Great, a lot of you have. That's great. Red flag law, also known as an extreme risk protection order, ERPO. Red flag sounds easier to say. Under red flag law, a person who is, somebody from law enforcement or a family member can go before a judge and say, this person is a danger to themselves or others. We have evidence that this person is a danger to themselves or others. Here's the evidence. We think firearms should be removed from this person and they should not be able to purchase a firearm. The judge can then choose, make their judgment, whether to issue a temporary order, taking away their guns and prohibiting purchase. It's temporary until that person can prove that they're no longer a danger. You folks who live here in Douglas County saw the death of a deputy. That never should have happened. His mother took away his guns, and then he threatened to sue her if she didn't give them back. If we had had a red flag law, those guns could have been taken away if they could have shown. And it was clearly shown that he was a danger to others. But the police could do nothing about it. Let's give them the tools to do something about it. So right now, we are trying to get introduced a late bill in the legislature on a red flag law. And we need to win a number of leadership yeses to get it introduced as a late bill. One of your state senators here in Douglas County is one of those leaders. We need his help to help get that introduced as a late bill. And then we need to get it going to the right committee, and we need to have it going through a legislative process. So that's one example of something to be done. It's very common sense. It doesn't pick on all gun owners. No, it says these people are especially dangerous. Let's do something about it. So, with that, other thing I would say is, if you're really fighting for stronger gun laws, watch your language. And by that I mean, when you start talking gun control, you're going to turn a lot of people off. For some reason, a number of people don't like that word control. You need gun reform, you need gun safety, gun violence prevention, whatever you want to call it. Consider that. But remind them that most people are supportive of stronger gun laws. Let's do something to make it happen and overcome the gun lobby that doesn't want your voices heard. And let's especially get the young people out to vote. That's a key. That's you do. You can do to support the gun lobby and to get young people out and registering and voting. Thank you.
I was muted. Thanks so much, Tom, for coming out. We really appreciate it. And we're really sorry for your loss. You can see here in this slide the reason why our legislature keeps voting and refusing to vote for anything with respect to gun control or gun safety. It's because they're getting paid to not vote for it. And I think we need to take just a minute. Usually I say we should have a moment of silence for all those, killed in gun violence, but I don't think we should anymore. I don't think we should be silent. I think we should start getting loud. And I think we need to contemplate what the absolute plethora of guns in our society is doing, the quantity of guns and the simple availability of guns. What are the effects of all those guns in our society? And I think you can look at this slide and you can see it. So at this time, we're going to kind of do a panel, yes or no, I do support or don't support. And Katie's going to read through the safety measures and the Never Again agenda. And I'll turn that over to Katie.
So the Never Again agenda has 5 basic pillars. The first one being universal, comprehensive background checks. The next is bringing the ATF into the 21st century with digitized, searchable database.
Do you want to give the candidates a show of hands of whether or not they support these measures as you go through them?
Okay, right. Who supports universal, comprehensive background checks? Bring the ATF into the 21st century? So the funds for the Center of Disease Control to research gun violence epidemic in America. And what about a high-capacity magazine ban? And a ban on assault weapons. Yeah. So now we're going to do, just raise your hand if you support, same thing. Extended waiting periods before purchasing a gun. Magazine limitations. A federal firearm licensing program for assault and semi-automatic weapons.
Yeah.
Updated and integrated system of comprehensive criminal background investigations. Federal firearms registration database. Can I go through that?
Question,
Yes.
the federal firearms would be in addition to our state level, not supplanting?
Yes.
If we were stricter, we could still enforce stricter if we chose.
I believe so, yes. Alright. And then what about concealed carry? No, just concealed carry in general? No? With training? Alright, okay. And then what about concealed carry on campus? No? Alright. Alright. Do you guys support a ban on bump stocks?
Yes.
Tax on ammunition? Banning all non-stock enhancements and modifying mechanisms for firearms? Okay. An age limit for owning and purchasing firearms and ammunition? Alright. And then we'll have a question on that later to elaborate. What about mandatory mental health evaluations?
Do we
have the funding and resources.
I think so. Before purchasing a firearm, you should have to go through, and I think that question wasn't
We have-
specific
we
enough.
have-
Before purchasing a firearm, should you have to go through a mandatory mental health evaluation?
I believe that we have a question on that later if you'd like to elaborate. Alright, how about Army teachers? What's next, lunch ladies? Alright, so our first question comes from Annie, who is a 10-year-old student from Frontier Valley Elementary School in Parker. She asks, and this is heartbreaking, how would you suggest we spread information to kids my age about how to survive a school shooting? They make us do drills, but I don't know what a gunshot sounds like, or how to defend myself, or even if I can. Because nobody knows what to do, I think we'd all die or get really hurt. She's 10.
So at this time, do any of the candidates want to offer a response to that question?
I think it's absolutely unacceptable that our kids have to even think or consider. We as future legislators and ones who are incumbent need to be held accountable for making sure that our kids are safe.
Could you introduce
Well-
yourself?
Oh, I do, and I'm so sorry for being late. My name is Danielle Combo, and I'm running for House District 45. I'm a Democrat, and I'm very much for all of the things that we are discussing here today. I have 4 children in schools here in Douglas County, and I just, I'm running because I want to protect them and hopefully build a better future for us and our kids. I was having my campaign kickoff event, and so that is why I was late. So there's a good excuse for that, meeting people in the community. So thank you so much for having me, and I really am glad to be here.
Chase Cohen, running for CD4. And I'll try to keep it right now just to this question specifically and not into the other topics. I have an 8-year-old daughter sitting right there and a 13-year-old daughter who's at a volleyball game right now. Will be here soon. So this question definitely hits right home. When I was a kid, we did drills for tornadoes. And now they do drills for active shooters. It's a sad sign of our times. We'll get into what we think we can do to make a difference to stop the shootings from happening. But I think the training is valuable. It's unfortunate we have to do it, but we have to message it in a way that's not fatalistic, that doesn't scare kids. But I do believe, as someone in the military, that having at least a little bit of training to know what to do, to lock those doors, to put in that door stop, to shelter in place, to hide, to run whenever you can. We have to walk that line between scaring our kids and getting them prepared. I worry about a school shooting every day. And obviously it's something that many of us in this room think about. So for me, to ignore the problem and to not give them some basic education on what that might help save them is the wrong answer as well. And we'll talk a lot more today about the other things we can do to stop the input into the school shooting situation.
Hello, my name is Simone Aiken. I'm running for House District 44.
Simone, sorry. Like the initial slide said, and I apologize for interrupting, we're going to have about 2-minute responses to questions and have 2 or 3 2-minute responses to each question to move the program along, okay? So go ahead and finish your answer, and then from then on we'll do 2 answers per question. And I apologize, every candidate won't get to answer every question.
All right, I'll keep it very quick. Chase mentioned tornado drills, fire drills. These are what I grew up with. These are simple instructions you follow, and if you do, you're going to be fine. Active shooter drills don't work with that because you know you have an active shooter when someone has started shooting, which means somebody is not fine. So this is a fundamentally different kind of drill. The other issue is that there's 2 kinds of school shooters. There's an outsider and then there's an insider. If someone is attacking a school, something that happens particularly with girls' schools in certain places of the world, there are ways to do drills that are very effective. But when it's an insider, when it's a student, they take those drills too. So whatever your drill is, whatever preparations you have, you are training the shooter as well as the kids who get shot. So like in Parkland, they had lockdown drills, and he started by pulling a fire alarm. So everybody came rushing out in the hall. And that's a problem. So I think to some degree, the drills give us the illusion of doing something when we're not. And that's what I'm going to say.
So right here is a tornado-proof shelter that's also bulletproof, and I think that as unfortunate as it is, that we should probably consider doing things like this until we have some sort of comprehensive gun control that will prevent the firearms from ever entering the schools or getting into the wrong hands in the first place. So, as a legislator, would you support funding protective equipment for schools? That's the next question, and I'd like to give the mic to Karen because she had it last time.
Thank you very much. I'm Karen McCormick, running for CD4 to send this man home. On so many levels, we need to support our schools, and this is just one of them. Our schools nationwide need our support in funding. We need to support our teachers, but to protect the physical plant of the school, there are some schools nationwide that have really taken some incredible measures in this respect on automatic door locking, fogging of their hallways to confuse a shooter, and have teachers that wear monitors around their necks to be able to communicate with the rest of the school. Some very innovative, forward-thinking schools that are leading us, and I think we should look to those districts and follow their example and make sure that we are providing the funding, because without the funding, none of this can happen. And that's what we depend on our federal legislators to do, to make sure that that budget has the funding necessary to build these programs to protect our kids and our teachers.
Hi, I'm Julia Barnell Sargent. I'm running for District 30 to unseat Chris Holbert. And maybe we'd like to see that done. In answer to this question, I am royally pissed off that we have to allocate funding to harden a school rather than giving our teachers raises. I don't understand why we are more interested in making our schools impervious to people from inside and outside and anything that could happen, instead of having our teachers be able to teach, our children be able to learn, and have some control over the firearms that are rampant in our society. So I think the issues that we need to address are, first, we need to understand what kinds of mental illness actually do lead to firearms and shooting. We don't need to discriminate against all of the mentally ill because a few are going to go off. And once we understand these things, we're going to need to take a look at what kinds of firearms need to be in whose hands and what kinds of firearms should not be in any civilian's hands. But to take money away from our school system to harden a school that should be going to our teachers' salaries and benefits makes me mad.
So I think this slide speaks about the availability of guns in our society, and this is a crazy statistic. When I read it, I couldn't believe it, but gunshot wounds are now the third leading cause of death among U.S. children. 7,000 kids per year are injured or killed by a firearm in the United States. 7,000. And I think we need to address our cultural kind of addiction to firearms and talk to people about why it's unsafe for people who aren't fully mature or educated or trained to have access to that type of firearm.
All right. What measures do you believe need to be enacted in order to prevent the senseless violent deaths and maiming injuries of so many children?
Hello, my name is Michael Hupp. I am also running for House District 45 to send this person back to Castle Rock. So Mr. Mauser talked a little bit about the GDROs, and if they don't get it through this year, I will promise everyone in this room that when I'm elected in November, it will be the first bill that I write in Congress. It's got bipartisan support. People on both sides of the aisle understand that there are law-abiding gun owners. We need to work on getting the guns out of the people who are dangerous. Almost every mass shooting has had clear warning signs in advance, and even in Parkland, they were talking about how can we get these guns away from this kid, and they couldn't do it. He also mentioned that there is a Douglas County police officer that is not alive today from Castle Rock, from our district, that had we had GDROs in, or red flag laws in effect, he would be alive today. And so that would be one of them. Also, Corey Gardner was unable to join us. My understanding is that he has been part of the block in our federal government for a bill called Fix NICS. NICS is the national database that these people end up on that can't buy a gun, and it's not working. And there is a bipartisan bill with tremendous support, and he is the one that's holding it up. So we need to get him out, and I look forward to serving the state of Colorado starting in November.
My name is Tim Krug, and I'm running for the Colorado State Board of Education. Can I just first ask, how many of you out there are on Team Tucker? Anybody know what I'm talking about? I just wanted to share with you some really great news here in Douglas County. On Thursday, our district named a new superintendent, a man by the name of Dr. Thomas Tucker, a truly inspirational leader. I think he's going to address some of these issues here in Douglas County. Very excited about it. I think the answer to this question is what we're all here today for. We're talking about many of the different answers. There's no one simple answer that will help stop these senseless deaths. One more that I'd like to put forward is I believe that gun manufacturers should be required to fund PSAs, public service announcements, that inform parents on how to keep their firearms safely stored, because about 500 kids a year are dying from negligent shootings, negligent discharges. So I'd like to see more education on the subject, especially with parents with kids in the home. Thank you.
Having established that unsecured firearms pose such a significant health risk to children, what is your projected timeline for drafting and introduction of mandatory storage and transportation regulations for firearms?
November 7th.
Well, and this is important because you saw statistics before, is that we have shootings that involve malintent, but we have lots of shootings that are accidental in this country. That especially comes to young kids. So being able to effectively secure your firearms at home, even when there's no malintent, is extremely important to reducing accidental gun violence in this country. Because as Isaac mentioned, as Katie mentioned, there's a lot of guns in this country if you haven't noticed. So we do need legislation that needs to be done right away to prove that you are taking care of your weapons safely if you have them at home. And that is something that I think that we can do, again, right away as we move into Congress, if we were able to vote in enough folks who can support those, stuff like that. And that's where next November comes in for all of you folks. Thanks.
Kind of going off what Chase said, there are more guns than citizens in the United States. Okay. 21,000 Americans per year commit suicide with a gun. The fact is, there's a driving force behind the epidemic of gun suicide in America. Americans are 8 times more likely to die by firearm suicide than people in other high-income countries. 13 veterans die by gun suicide every day, and child firearm suicide is on the rise.
So, I'm going to try and cruise through Pete's story real quick because we're running a little behind, but this is my buddy Pete, and he's one of the toughest, smartest, strongest Marines that I've ever known. And we need laws like we were speaking about earlier that could remove firearms from dangerous situations, because it was demonstrated before Pete took his own life that he had struggles with suicidal ideations. And had we had some laws like that in place, I think Pete might be still alive today. So these are just a few statistics for you. 90% of the people who commit suicide with a gun are successful, whereas less than 10% of people who attempt suicide without a gun are successful. So I think that speaks volumes about the availability of guns during that time of crisis and the need for those type of laws that we've already mentioned earlier. So what type of procedural measures would you support that would adequately identify and help prevent at-risk people from gaining access to firearms and ammunition?
Thank you so much. I don't know if we had discussed extreme risk protection orders. Have we? I hate to be repetitive on that, but just to emphasize the importance of having those available and protecting not only our citizens, but our law enforcement officers as well, to be able to protect people from harming themselves and harming others. There have already been 5 states that have implemented this and have seen success there, so there is that data available, and so we really need to fight in getting that established in our state.
This is on. And along those same lines, getting the red flag policies enacted nationwide. I spoke with a fireman recently that was so frustrated on his inability to take firearms out of the home where he was personally warned by a mom. He didn't have the legal authority to take those firearms out of this home. He wanted to, she wanted him to, everyone wanted him to, but he didn't have the backing legally. We have got to change this as soon as possible, because we as citizens are out there. We're the eyes and ears on the ground in the homes. We see the problem, we know what to do, we need the backing by law to allow us to do that. We also need to implement waiting periods, 3, 5 days, whatever works, for when people have a rash decision, a knee-jerk reaction to do something, whether it's to harm themselves or others. Having that period of time, a cooling off period, is essential to get help to that person, for someone to notice that there's an issue there, and that needs to be championed at the federal and state level.
So in total, 21,000 Americans die by their own hand every year. Yeah, but firearm suicide, I think, like we've already discussed, is something that we can use common sense strategies to combat and to mitigate and to save our brothers and sisters.
Corey Sapienza, a junior from South High School, asks, what is the ideal solution to suicide prevention, and what laws should be implemented in your opinion?
Again, my name is Michael Huff again. So obviously, when we're talking about suicide, we're definitely talking about mental health. And there, I believe, so this is about guns, this forum, but there is more to this issue clearly than just guns. There needs to be, both in schools and out of schools, adults that are trained and can, whether they're psychologists that can speak with students and that the students trust. If the kids don't trust these people, they're not going to seek them out. So we've got to find ways to get people that are trustworthy and approachable, where our kids can access them if they need to. With respect to firearms and their role in suicide, we saw the statistics. Firearms are the most lethal way to end your life, and when you use a different method, you're much more likely to survive it. I don't know that the Australia model is the model for the United States, but they reorganized all of their firearms into categories, made some of them illegal, made the rest of them hard to get, and at that time, they thought of it as an assault weapons ban, but what they found was by banning some of these assault weapons and some of these other weapons, the incidence of gun-related suicides also decreased. It's all about availability. So if these guns are out there and accessible, that's sadly, in the heat of passion, that's what they turn to. So if we can remove the access, we can get them hopefully the help they need before they turn to other means.
I heard this was from a student, of course. This is something that we talk about in education quite a lot. Parents are talking about this, students are talking about this. When you ask what the ideal solution to suicide prevention is, there is no ideal solution, so the answer is we need to try everything and anything that we possibly can. Here in Douglas County, we have a program called Safe to Tell that has prevented a number of suicides, prevented a number of violent activities from happening, but it needs funding. And so for me, from my lens, from the education lens, we know that what we really need to do is fund our schools because not only can programs like Safe to Tell be funded, but we also have a drastic amount of social workers that are missing from our schools right now. Right now, our social workers are working with about 500 to 600 kids. They should be working with 200 to 250. And so they're really just not able to get around to all the students that they need to be able to. So the thing that you can do is please help us when school funding issues come up. Please support them. Please tell your friends and family, because it's about more than just giving teachers salaries, which they absolutely deserve, but it's also about keeping our kids safe.
Thanks, and I wanted to say that with respect to suicidal ideations and suicide prevention in general, we just need to start communicating about it the same way we communicate about our regular emotions like fear and despair and anger and anguish, and understanding that suicidal ideations are just the normal reactive human thought processes to your environment, the situation you're in, and the experience set that you have. And that once we start understanding that those are normal human reactive thought processes and we start communicating about them, we can start mitigating them. Julia wanted to say something on that.
This is a real important question to me, so I'm breaking the rules and forgive me. We have to understand that there's a difference between chronic mental illness and circumstantial mental illness. The people with chronic mental illness, you know by the way that you have seen them operate in the past, whether or not they are a danger with a firearm. And you can either remove firearms from their control or realize that they're not a problem. But the mentally ill are more likely to be victimized by firearms than those who are not mentally ill. So we cannot discriminate. The next piece is, with circumstantial mental illness, you may not really see it coming. It happens when people get under enormous stress at work or enormous stress at home, and you need to be paying attention to how the people around you are doing, being aware of each other. And if someone is going through a series of stresses all simultaneously, perhaps they are not going to be able to handle a firearm for that period of time until the stress is handled. But that doesn't mean that they need to be stigmatized forever. So we have to have research performed on this through our CDC or through whatever we have in Colorado that's the equivalent, so that we can begin to notice in a chronic person, what are the signs that they are likely to either use a firearm against someone else or themselves, and how do we detect the signs that somebody is under sufficient pressure that they have a circumstantial mental illness that needs to be dealt with.
As far as this question goes, I think we've covered it already, but should law enforcement personnel with a judge's order have the ability to legally, temporarily, or permanently remove secure firearms and ammunition from unsafe environments or locations that are improperly equipped for adequate storage? And I think that we've established that we need to put some regulations in place to make sure that the storage and securing of firearms and ammunition is adequate.
Sorry, just to add one more thing. I've worked in healthcare and worked with physicians and providers who say there's nothing they can do in terms of protecting the folks, our community, from people who may be having mental distress in a way that they can harm themselves or others. They can admit them within 24 hours, but after that, there's nothing that they can do. So we need to make sure that we give our healthcare personnel the ability to be able to raise a flag in terms of these folks who may be a danger to our community.
Thank you. My name is Chris Zornio. I am exploring actively for Cory Gardner's seat in 2020. I hope I've given everyone here, 2018 elections are incredibly important to me, and so I hope I've given everyone a chance to speak on at least 2 questions, I think, if I did my math right. And I wanted to jump in on this one because while I know that we've already established we support this, one thing that I wanted to add is that I haven't heard any talk about restricting access for those who have had a misdemeanor in stalking. This is a women's issue especially, and it's something that we can do and make a lot of headway in firearm violence. And so I would love to see that come to the table on this topic as well, as related to, again, misdemeanors for those who have a history of stalking.
So the presentation is working, but our well-regulated militia strictly controls access to firearms, ammunition, and ordnance in order to keep its personnel as safe as possible. In a society with roughly 320 million firearms, we need the same rules and regulations that our military uses to protect its soldiers, as in Switzerland. Would you support a similarly comprehensive and strict military-type set of rules and regulations for our society governing access, transportation, storage, and use of firearms and ammunition? Why or not?
As the active Army officer up here on the panel, let me say I think this is the time to discuss this issue. When we talk about the difference between civilian and military use, okay? The common denominator in all these shootings is an AR-15 rifle. For those of you who don't know, AR-15 does not stand for assault rifle. It stands for Armalite. Armalite was the company contracted by the U.S. military in the 1950s to create a weapon for the U.S. military that could shoot faster, more effectively, more accurately, and carry more ammunition for the soldiers. They were extremely successful. There's a reason that weapon system has changed very little in over 50 years, because it's extremely effective. I've carried an M4 rifle, which is basically the same as an AR-15, for 10 years for the Army. I carried it for a year in combat in Afghanistan. And believe me, there is no doubt in my mind there's a singular purpose for that weapon, the one for which it was designed. To fight a war, to fight in combat, not to fight in schools, not to go into schools and have the ability to shoot quickly, accurately, and multiple times without reloading. So this weapon needs to be banned from civilian use. That is bar none. If you want to shoot one, go down to your recruiting office and join the military. Yeah. I think I'm getting cut off. Sorry, I get fired up on this one.
Yes?
Okay, at this point, we are going to transition into a section that's kind of on the Second Amendment. And before we do that, we have some kids up front from local schools, and we wanted to give them the opportunity to ask their questions. And why don't we go oldest to youngest?
So this question comes from Danica from Pine Grove Elementary. She asks, how will we know there are no guns in our school? Should we have a metal check or detectors and a security officer?
Does anyone want to answer that question? So that's from Danica at Pine Grove, and she wants to know, should we have metal detectors and a security officer?
Well, I actually visited, again, my name is Danielle Combo. I have a 14-year-old at Douglas County High School. And I went there for parent-teacher conferences, like the rest of the herd, and got to speak with Deb, who's worked for Douglas County Schools for 21 years as a security officer with no protections on her other than to press a panic button. I think the state in which we're in our society, we need to have secure schools. Unfortunately, I hate the idea of my kids feeling like they're in a prison, but at this point, until we can get these laws to change around banning assault weapons and having a law, ERPO laws, risk protection orders in place, we need to make sure that we secure our schools and that our kids and our teachers are safe. I certainly would like to see progress in this area. It's not about taking the guns away from folks who are law-abiding citizens, who are responsible, but it's just, at this point, there's really nothing we can do but to enforce security in our schools. And it saddens me that funding would have to go to that resource and not to the teachers and the students that need it the most. We should be focusing on growing our education and being more advanced and being higher up on that list in the world when it comes to education, but unfortunately this is what we're facing. And the question is, I think, to all of us, and those of us who want to lead, is what are we going to do about this? And we need to do something, and fast. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dylan, and what do you plan to do to not have as many guns out in the public?
Not have as many guns in the public. So the first thing that we've all been talking about is to really have a better definition of what constitutes a personal firearm for responsible gun owners and what constitutes a weapon of war. We have way too many of one. And the responsible gun owners all over this country want to be part of the solution. And we need to get together with the majority of Americans that want to fix this problem so that we have firearms of protection for people in the right hands with the right training and the right safety measures in place, and make sure that the weapons of war are off the streets and out of people's hands.
And how long do you think people should wait to maybe when they're to get to that?
So what should the waiting period be?
I can answer this really quick. I think at least 7 days. If, again, we're worried about these crimes of passion, these heat of the moment things, 7 days is ample time. Obviously, if that person demonstrates that they are potentially violent, she mentioned stalkers. I've also heard a big concern about not just stalking, but domestic violence in general. Anybody who's been accused of domestic violence would potentially be put on the list. So 7 days would be a minimum for me.
Let's do a real quick add-on.
Yep.
Hello, it's long message. I think the answer to that is long enough to do a check. And one of the things we've had lately is people say, there's a waiting period, there's a check, and if we don't finish the check in time, they just give the gun out for free. And this creates a perverse incentive, because people who don't want the check to be run in the first place just drag their heels, and then, oh look, we're past the time limit, I guess we get no check. And I think it would improve the funding and the support of making our background check system complete and fast if we said that if you run out of time, it's no. I think people would suddenly get those checks done so fast. I think that problem would go away.
So I read an article in Colorado Politics, and current Colorado legislation dictates that retailers that receive no response for 3 days from the state are then obligated to sell the firearm.
And I did have a few words I'd like to say about the Second Amendment. So let's take a look at the State of the Union when the Second Amendment was ratified. People of color were being abducted, enslaved, and considered property. Women weren't yet allowed to vote. Native American people were being forcibly removed from their land, and one of the main purposes for gun ownership is to commit genocide against them. At the time, the best trained soldiers could fire a musket maybe 3 times per minute, with very little speed, accuracy, and range. Now, even amateur gunmen can fire hundreds of shots with terrifying accuracy within a minute and reload in seconds. The State of the Union has changed. Technology has evolved. The founders set up the Constitution for room to make room for these evolutions in technology and social attitudes. The United States is falling behind, and it's past time to make a change.
So this is a question, and Simone, you can add your comment that you have. I'll let you answer first. So do you believe regulating access to firearms and ammunition violates the constitutional rights of citizens?
All right, so I started this before they went to the next slide, but we always talk about how far gun technology has advanced since the founding, and it's true, times have changed. But that's not the only thing that changed. When you looked at our founding fathers, they believed that people should be able to take on the government and win. And it wasn't just the Second Amendment that they did to guarantee this. They also set a limit on standing armies at the federal level. And they put in a specific limit so that no funding bill for a federal army can last more than 2 years. And so it wasn't just arming the people, it was disarming the government. And this made sense at the time, because a person with a gun was the height of military technology. You could fight off opposing countries, you could fight off Britain with just people and some guns. And this was totally new. I mean, for thousands of years, military was like knights on horseback, which were like the equivalent of a tank. It took entire dedicated training, it took immense piles of money to maintain these kinds of military forces. And then firearms came, and suddenly the peasants could win. And our forefathers were the peasants, so we won, and it was great. But now technology has changed, and it isn't just the gun technology that's changed. It's also tanks, planes, and automobiles. It's drones. And the entire purpose of the Second no longer really applies because a common citizen cannot have the height of military technology anymore. It's still really scary compared to what they used to have. But if you're going to go toe-to-toe with the mightiest military on the planet, you're going to lose. And no amount of AR-15s is going to get there for it. So if you want to talk about Second Amendment intentions, it's not just AR-15s for everybody. It's also getting rid of the Pentagon. It's also getting rid of the Department of Defense. It's also getting rid of all that so we could actually have parity. And we're not going to do that because nobody else is going to do that. And if we do, that just doesn't work. So the entire premise is kind of wrong.
Add on to the question for you,
Yes,
Ms. Combo.
Yes.
Do you believe that the Second Amendment in any way impedes the government's ability to actually protect the citizenry in its current form or interpretations?
No, I don't. But I want to bring up a point, which is I was having a conversation earlier today about ownership of the Second Amendment and freedom. It's become a Republican issue when in actuality it's a nonpartisan issue. We all have the right to own and bear arms, and we all are patriots, regardless of whether or not we're Democrats or Republicans or not. We need to take that back. We need to take freedom and the Second Amendment back into our party and make sure that people understand that this is not about infringing on anyone's rights. It's about protecting our citizens and keeping our kids safe. When it comes to our government and the Second Amendment, and we obviously, as citizens, as an average citizen with a handgun, couldn't fight against a military force, right? So it's also common sense. It's repackaging it and marketing it to the public in a way that helps them understand that it's about the collective. It's about protecting us. And thank you so much for letting me share.
I don't think we mentioned this earlier, but all the questions that Katie's been asking were submitted by high school students.
High school, college, and even elementary school. So like all ranges. The ranges are from 10 to 20.
Yeah, pretty upsetting that a 10-year-old had to submit a question like that. So I just wanted to point out, again, speaking to kind of the bipartisan nature of the Second Amendment, very recently it was reinterpreted. It used to be, as Simone talks about, and then with the Heller decision, I don't know how many people are familiar with the Heller decision, but it was basically Justice Antonin Scalia did confirm that it confers an individual right to own firearms. It's not just about standing armies, it is an individual right. That bothered a lot of people on the left, but he did, in that same opinion, offer a very important caveat to that, and in that he says the Second Amendment does not guarantee the right to carry any weapon in any way possible, anywhere you want to go. So, like every other right that we have, First Amendment, we can't walk into a crowded theater and yell fire, right? We have regulations. Even the Second Amendment already has regulations. I would love to drive a tank. Honestly, I think that would be a blast. But I can't do that without signing up for the military, right? So we have regulations on the ability to possess arms, okay? So when we talk about arms, that can mean anything from a handgun to an F-15 fighter plane. I would also like to fly one of those. But Justice Scalia, a conservative firebrand, made it very clear, hopefully to his conservative constituents as well, this is not an unlimited right, and we should treat it as such.
I keep doing this to them. How many of you believe that the right to vote is in our Constitution and something that is guaranteed to every person? Anybody? Okay, you all agree with that we have the right to vote? How many of you register in order to be able to vote? Everybody registers in order to be able to vote. How many of you feel like that stops you from having the right to vote? So, how is owning a gun the right to own a gun any different from having the right to vote? If I have the right to vote, but I still have to register and to show people that I am qualified and have that right and meet all the standards, then why is it against my rights to have to register to own a gun and to have to show that I am allowed to have one? This doesn't make sense. There are impediments on each and every one of the rights that we are given. We all have the right to freedom of speech. But I can't go and say that somebody is committing a crime willy-nilly when it isn't true, or I'll be sued for libel. There are limits. And so why is this the only amendment that has no limits? I think that's something we need to think about. And one of the other things that I would like to ask is, how many of you drive a car? Is it registered? Do you have to have a license? Do you have to have insurance?
Yes.
What would happen if you had to have insurance to own a firearm so that if somebody got hurt, they would not... Somebody gets hurt and don't have to set up a GoFundMe in order to survive for the rest of their lives. So these are some things that I think we need to be thinking about when we are thinking about gun safety.
Thank you. All right. This next question comes from Emily Counts, who's a junior at Legend High School. How have changes in our society since the drafting of the Bill of Rights justified the reconsideration of the validity of the Second Amendment?
Well, this directly goes to what was just said. I'll tell you why we don't have those changes. It's called the NRA. Because we have a very powerful lobbying agency working against us to do that. What I have in my hand is something I got in the mail this morning. This is mailed to me. It is my NRA support questionnaire to see if they want to support me as a candidate for Congress. Boy, I'm going to let anybody look at it. Let's look at it. There's some crazy stuff in here. Oh, it's like 8 pages. I am more than happy to get an F grade on this. I'll give it to Mr. Buck. He's in their pocket anyway. But that is my opinion of why we have such problems with this. Why can't we enact even the smallest regulations? Because we have a very powerful lobbying source behind it. They prevent us from having true bipartisan and constructive debate on this issue. Because to the NRA and to their message to their constituents is that any change of gun laws is a move to pull the Second Amendment away. And that is not true. And when it comes to all of us up here, all of us progressive candidates, and how we move forward next November in the general election, that's what we have to get keyed in on. How do we message that we can have common sense gun reform? We can do some of these things that we're all talking about here today, and we're not out to repeal the Second Amendment. The Constitution is a living, breathing document. Someone asked me that earlier, and that's what I believe. There's ways we can change it. We don't have to make it disappear. I believe we should be able to responsibly own weapons. And that by having laws that help us do that responsibly, that actually secures the Second Amendment. It makes challenges to it less likely and less possible. Do you think we'd all be talking about repealing the Second Amendment right now if there wasn't all these school shootings? Probably not. Okay? This is just as effective for the NRA to use as a weapon against us as anything else. So don't forget that. Stand up to them. Stand up to them when you vote. Because we can't have constructive criticism. We can't have constructive dialogue about any of these topics with their money in our representatives' pocket. Thanks.
One of the biggest changes that has occurred since the Bill of Rights was written is we as a civilized society made the decision to put our safety in the hands of our local police forces and our state troopers. We decided to have that protection in the hands of trained people. And so that's a big change from back when this was written, that we all recognize and we know that we have turned that over. We as citizens don't all have to carry firearms to defend ourselves. We can. We made the decision to turn that over. And the other thing that's happening that we all need to get behind as adults is the kids that have started this movement this year, that are acting like adults, when so many adults in positions of leadership have been acting like kids, then let's get behind the kids. Let's get behind those kids and push it forward. We can be the backbone and we can be the net that helps push those kids forward. This movement is taking shape and it's building momentum, and we have to make sure that it goes all the way. Thank you.
Okay. This next question is paraphrased from Leah Dungeon. There. Raise up. Right. Okay. She's a senior at Douglas High School. And she asks, is the right to own a gun considered more important than the right to feel safe in public places? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If so, why? And if not, how will you encourage and pass legislation to resolve this?
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge the young folks in the room. It is so important for you guys to be a part of this process. We really need to socialize our kids to engage more because the people that you vote for, people that lead you, they impact your future and impact our country. So thank you so much for being here. It's very great of you. So I was just actually having this kind of conversation with folks that came over to visit, and I enjoy going to the movies and to the mall and to the parks and hanging out with my family in public places, but I no longer feel safe to do that. I don't want to be in a position. I don't want to be in a position to have to choose which child I need to save, right? And so I don't often take them with me to the grocery store anymore. So that impacts my family time and my family life. As far as what I would do as a legislator, I believe that we need to be strong and stand up against these folks, especially the NRA and Rocky Mountain Gun Association. We need to make sure that they feel our impression and that we get out to vote. That is how we can make our voices heard. We come out in sheer numbers and keep on marching and coming to town halls and leading the charge for change. We can make that happen. And as a legislator, I would absolutely support a bill that would protect our communities from senseless acts of violence. I'm a mom of 4, like I said, and I'm a mama lion. That means I will do everything in my power to protect my cubs. Thank you very much.
Hi, again, my name is Trish Dornio, and I am actively working to help this man over here to early retirement. So this question hits home very much for me. So I have a nephew. He is 8, almost 9, and after the Parkland shootings, I called him, and we were talking, and I said, how are you feeling? And he says, oh, don't worry, Aunt Patricia. Now that I'm 8, I'm getting taller, and it's easier for me to climb out of the window. Now, he's going to the same elementary school that I went to, and we did not have drills for climbing out of the window. That was not part of my growing up. And to him, this is now incredibly normal and incredibly everyday, and he's going to carry that with him for the rest of his life. And that concerns me deeply. So the answer to your question is no. Your right to be safe in a public place always trumps that. However, here's the thing. My family agrees with that too, and they are gun owners. My family actually immigrated here, so my father came over with my grandparents, and they did not speak English, and the first job that they were able to get, my grandfather worked for Ruger. If you don't know what that is, it is a gun company. He worked on making specifically the wooden cases. I grew up target shooting, and all of them, they are quite conservative in all of that sort of sense, but they too believe that his right to be safe is important. And I really hope that we take this away. This is a bipartisan issue, and I really, really hope that we can all work together to bring the laws that we've been talking about and discussing here today. I would love if by the time I'm looking at 2020, they're already enacted by these types of people up here. If not, I will work hard to make sure that they are.
Now we have our guest speaker. Maurice.
So, Maurice is in here today. I didn't tell you that. Maurice is a great guy. Maurice is from my church. I know him. He's a good friend of mine. And he's from Chicago. And
Yay, Chicago.
in Chicago. And he lost his son to gun violence. And so that's why his story is in here. And he wanted me to apologize. He got the flu and wasn't able to make it out. But he lived in Chicago for 50 years, born and raised there. And he worked as a substance abuse counselor and a social progressive. And he had 2 sons. And Maurice Jr. was 17. And I think we all know about the epidemic of gun violence that's going on in Chicago today. But it's not just going on today, it was going on back then too. And Maurice's son, when he was 17, he was shot at a bus stop, but he lived. And then, unfortunately, Maurice Jr. got off work one day when he was 23, and he was on his way home, and he grabbed a soda and walked down on the wrong side of the street. They had just moved to a new neighborhood, and there were gangs in the neighborhood. He walked down the wrong side of the street, got into a fist fight. And the assailants that killed him were 17 and 19. And the 17-year-old ran back to the car, grabbed a pistol, and shot Maurice Jr. 17 times in the chest. And I think that speaks volumes about the capability of our firearms. When Maurice Jr. was shot the first time, he got hit by a couple pellets, and he lived. And the second time that he got shot by a semi-automatic assault weapon. And we see what the results were. sorry, it's hard for me to tell that story, but Bruce moved to Colorado in 2009, and he's been healing and seeking community at the Unitarian Universalist Church and dealing with the loss of his son. And so his story was really impactful when he told it to me. And I wanted to share it with you today, and I'm sorry that he wasn't here because he tells it a whole lot better than I do.
Thank you.
This is probably redundant, we're beating the dead horse, but semi-automatic firearms, that's what killed Maurice's son. They're weapons of war. They were designed for war specifically, and I think that that's where they ought to stay. With that being said, we just have this print material everywhere, and we talk about kids and how horrible it is that sometimes they're slaughtered at school, but when you have a little perspective, understanding that most firearm deaths come from suicide and accidental shootings every year, and as terrible as mass shootings are, suicide prevention and accidental shooting prevention by simple common sense storage laws would do a lot to protect our children. The perpetrator at Sandy Hook just grabbed the AR-15 assault rifle out of his mom's closet and then went to the school. There's just so many stories where the only reason why people died is because semi-automatic assault weapons were just laying around so they could pick them up. And we need to restrict access to those types of weapons. As a legislator, if elected, would you be willing to draft and support legislation that would establish a legal requirement for national mandatory firearm storage standards? We went over that. And I think we've established that it's a needed reform and that we all support it. One of the things that we've also talked about is an ownership registration system. And if we had an ownership registration system, then we could hold the owners of weapons civilly liable with civil liabilities and citations for infractions of improperly stored weapons. It's a simple concept, the same one we have for our vehicles. We need to start putting it into writing, putting it on laws and passing them. What do you think we can do to protect? Sorry.
This question comes from Kira Barr. She's a freshman at Metropolitan State University. What do you think we can do to protect students other than enforcing unhelpful rules like clear backpacks? How will you legislate and enforce these solutions?
I'm trying to remember, I've talked to a lot of you, so I'm not sure if this came up in previous open forum or if it was in a private conversation, but here in Douglas County we have student resource officers. They are trained. There's actually a Colorado School Resource Officer organization. There's also a national organization. There are some that think that student resource officers are part of the problem, that they are part of the pipeline to prison for some people. But I believe that here in Douglas County it would be not only a workable solution, but a beneficial one to all students. From the standpoint of, by being present, I talked to you earlier about having adults around that students can trust. If we put the right person who's trained with a weapon on our schools, that's not teachers, that's a police officer with training, and it's the right person, they can build relationships with our students. The students won't see them as, the worrisome, oh, we gotta run, here comes the police. This would hopefully be the type of person like we see in those YouTube videos where they're out playing basketball with the students and building those bridges. So that when there's a problem, those students feel comfortable going to that officer and saying, look, I'm not comfortable, so-and-so said something that is alarming, etc. So I believe that here in Douglas County, student resource officers would be a viable option. You know, there was a recent school shooting, not a mass shooting, but a shooting in Maryland where a student resource officer was able to kind of get involved. It doesn't sound like he was actually the one to neutralize the threat, but he got involved and stopped it from spreading before it got bad. So I think that would possibly be an option here in Douglas County that I would look at. And there are already organizations that train and certify these officers, and hopefully that would be a good fit for us.
So the one thing about having an armed security guard on campus in our schools, it worries me a little bit. And here's why. Because students of color tend to be disproportionately impacted by that. They are the first to be suspended, the first to be, you know, you've seen some of the headlines, children have been slammed to the ground or, you know, had their teeth knocked out by security officers, and they're most likely an African-American child. And so, given that I do have 4 sons, my 14-year-old is over 6 feet tall, goofy. He walked on the side of the house one day and scared me, right? But as his mom, I didn't have the instinct to grab a gun and shoot him. But in a school where an officer may be feeling intimidated by someone of his size, if he's having a bad day, maybe your kid broke up with his girlfriend, maybe a loved one passed away, instead of neutralizing the situation and helping, you know, that person calm down, they're getting harmed. And oftentimes they tend to be children of color. And so I want to caution against that, and hopefully that we can find resolutions to deal with kids, and especially those with mental health issues, working with healthcare professionals, people who are trained in mental health that can work with our kids, like a student counselor. I really am concerned about having armed personnel on campus. It breeds fear, which I don't want to see my second grader go through. Again, you know, they're already experiencing these drills, and it's starting, you know, really starting to look a lot like prisons. And, you know, I don't want my kids to grow up in a world like that, and nor do I want my grandchildren or future generations to grow up in a world like that. Thank you.
The conversation just a little bit. I'm Carol Johnson, and I'm running for one of the Douglas County offices. I wanted to just say to you that I think everybody here agrees that this is a very multifaceted problem. But one of the things that Robert Wright put out on his website today were the 5 things that you can say to people in order to sort of talk to them about the gun problem. The first thing is that with the weapons of war, the AR-15, basically when the assault weapons ban was implemented, mass shootings dropped by 37%, and homicides and suicides dropped by 41%. When it was allowed to expire in 2004, things rocketed up double again, double. So what we need from our legislators, that first step that almost everybody can agree on, is getting rid of those weapons and reinstituting the assault ban for us in the Congress. And I want to know what each of you is going to do that one thing. Thank you.
Okay, one of the things they use to divide us, one of the memes that they use is assault rifle, semi-automatic. Assault rifle, argue about that, get down into the weeds about the definition of a rifle. I'm tired of that argument. So I propose that we say, a weapon or firearm that can discharge more than, I don't know the numbers, you gave me the right answer, but I'm thinking a bullet per second. That's enough. I don't want to argue about whether it's an assault rifle or a semi-automatic. I just want to say that discharges more than you can pull a faster than you can pull a trigger. It probably is not meant for civilians. And so that will take care of that whole argument. And then we can say that those are appropriate for law enforcement and military, but probably not for people's homes. And then maybe you can go rent one at a shooting range if you really have to shoot it, or as Chase said, go sign up.
I want to answer you directly. Get that assault weapons ban back on the floor for a vote, ASAP.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to respectfully disagree with part of what you said. I feel like part of the problem with the assault weapon ban that existed even when it was there was the lack of definition of what an assault weapon is. We need a strict definition of what an assault weapon is. Even if that means we have to lay down a list of this weapon, that weapon, this weapon, that weapon. It needs to be very clear. It needs to be black and white and not gray. I think that's where we get into a problem because, as many of you probably have seen, several folks now these days will argue, oh, an AR-15, that's a sporting rifle. It's a sporting rifle. It's not. So, in my opinion, it's more definition, strict definitions, by manufacturer, by type, by capability, that is where we need to go in developing a new assault weapons ban.
Again, Trish Jordan, Cory Gardner. To elaborate a little bit, one of the things that we do in policy is that we often are enacting things or looking at things that we should have actually put into place 5 or 10 years ago. So I think most of the things that we're discussing here could have actually already been in place and should have already been in place. We should have never repealed, for instance, that to begin with. Another one is the research laws. We need to be able to research these sorts of issues. I don't think I mentioned earlier, one of the things about me is that I'm a scientist by training. And what that means is that I'm constantly looking forward. One of the things when I look at, so when Chase is talking about defining an AR-15, for example, and weapons of war and what these mean, I think that's wonderful. We definitely need to do that. We need to also look forward. So how many of you have heard of something called ghost guns? See very few hands up. So technology is wonderful. It affords us a lot of things, the cell phones in your pockets, the microphone I'm using right now. But there are some drawbacks that come with it. And one of the things that we're starting to see is the development of guns, and it can include weapons of war as we would typically define them, AR-15 styles, AK-47s, etc. And people are able to make these in shops without serial numbers, 3D printing, etc. So this is starting to come up. We do not currently have a way to regulate these sorts of things. It's very problematic for if they are used in crimes, there's no tracing. It's a big issue. And so as potential legislators all up here, one of the things that I would like to see is people start looking forward in these sorts of things and consider how to prevent. Because the answer the question we had earlier was actually how can we keep children safe? And yes, we can do all of these things now, but I also want to look forward and make the next set of laws in advance so that we're not having to have this discussion as a retrospective with more lives lost.
She really covered a whole bunch of wonderful stuff, and I feel like almost going back to before she started. When we talk about defining, and we talk about the guns, it's the characteristics. It's the amount of bullets they have, it's how fast they shoot, it's how big a hole they make in someone. Parkland wasn't the only shooting, I think, even that week. But it was lethal because the gun that was used was able to put many bullets out a lot. There was another shooting, I think almost a week later, with a kid where 6 children were wounded, but nobody died because that kid had a revolver. So he put 1 bullet into several people. It turns out we're really good at patching up 1 bullet, and it's terrible to be shot. But with the less deadly weapons, with the more civilian weapons, survival is much more likely. And that, I think, is something people seem to ignore. They think like either there's a gun, there's not a gun. But it does matter. It really does matter that there's fewer bullets. Like the Gabby Gifford shooting, the guy had to stop to reload, and a grandma came forward and grabbed his arm, and he couldn't reload, and the 2 big guys tackled him. This little lady stopped him because he had to stop to reload. I mean, that's amazing. And you can't do that with the very high capacity, very high firing guns because there's no pause. I mean, those things are self-defense if you need to defend against 50 people. And if 50 people are willing to take a bullet to get at you, you've probably done something really wrong.
This one here had a question.
Oh, yes, I have a statement anyway. No guns are allowed in the Capitol. No guns are allowed in Washington and the Capitol. No guns are allowed in the White House. Why?
Do you think social media is contributing to the prevalence of gun violence? If no, why? If yes, why and how can we resolve this?
Good question.
I do think that it does, and not because it necessarily promotes gun violence. I think it just promotes more aggressive rhetoric. You know, when you have anonymity online, your handle is some mix of numbers and letters, and your picture is a picture of your dog. There's the bravery of being out of range, and we've lost civil discourse. And so we can't have agreeable conversations. We can't agree to disagree. Now it's all about calling names. You're a libtard, you're a snowflake, you're this, you're that. And that has filtered its way into our debates now. I've actually seen a few online discussions that are edgy, but relatively civil, and every time somebody will comment, wow, guys, this is actually really civil. And it's like, we can't do that and have it not be noteworthy. So when we polarize our society, you know, the enemy of a radical is not those of us in the middle, or it's not the radical on the other side, it's those of us in the middle who are apathetic. They need to push us to one extreme or the other. That's how radicalism works. And we're starting to see that more and more in our online society. You know, I stay out of the comment sections of Twitter anymore because I'm there to read what's posted and the rest of it's garbage. So that's my thought.
Okay, we're so polite up here. When it comes to social media, what I've learned about is there's target marketing that, you know, when you like a post, all of a sudden now your feed is filled with those similar ideals, even if it was something that you were just kind of perusing around, you know, the web and viewing. But what happens is we become siloed. We become only exposed to the things that we are agreeable with and not the other side. So we need to have more diversity and, you know, and not allow folks like NRA to have these dummy accounts and they're, you know, antagonizing people who disagree with them and also promoting that type of support for issues that are hurting our country. And so I don't know if there are, you know, we could introduce regulations around this and making sure that there are more opposing points of view being exposed to people. I mean, when you get into issues of freedom of speech. And so, but what I've seen like with Facebook and Twitter, it's whatever group you belong to, that is all you see. And so something has to be done about that. And maybe it's that we need to get together in more forums like this where we get to be face to face with each other and engage one another and put down the screen for a moment. Because that is how real change can happen.
One thing I'd like to also mention, I'm not only a scientist, I teach at CU Denver right now, and I teach behavioral neuroscience, and in particular we teach research methods as part of that. And I love when my students ask questions like this, because the first thing that I do is I actually give it back to them. And I say, well, what do you think and why? Now my students have had me for most of a semester now, and they would say, well, what's the science? How can we look back at the science and interpret it? And so I really want to bring this back to the necessary component of being allowed to study gun violence as a part of the CDC and as part of public health, because we can actually answer questions like this, not just have it be my personal opinion. We can take all of our opinions and we can study it in our experiences, and then we can actually answer that with validity.
I just wanted to add real quick to her point. We asked a question earlier about should the CDC be allowed to study gun violence, and that we're talking about the Dickey Amendment that was passed that prevented that, and that has been repealed in the most recent omnibus. So we do now have that ability. Obviously, too soon to get any good data, but hopefully we will.
No funding attached to that.
There's no funding, yeah, so it's the funding aspect of this. We have to make it a priority. It has to be.
But we can do
Study
it.
it, we just can't pay for it.
Well, which means you can't study it. As a researcher, that means you don't study it.
So, okay, we've taken the first step to study, but now let's talk about what's going to be against us when we start studying. I want to read from the book of the NRA here. Question number 4. Government-funded research was openly biased in the 1990s. CDC officials unabashedly supported gun bans, used CDC funds to advocate for strict gun control, poured millions of taxpayer dollars into funding research that was in fact advocacy, thinly disguised medical journal hit pieces against gun ownership. It goes on and on. Even with ownership, what people say now, fake news, fake research. So this is what we're fighting against. This is the mindset we're fighting against. Yes, we need science. We need real research. But we need to be able to get people to understand that science is fact and not this propaganda. Thanks.
So I'm Katie. Y'all know me by now. I'm here to share a survivor story. Those of you who live in Parker are probably already familiar with it. On December 27th, 2011, Mark Royer fatally shot his ex-wife, Donna Royer, in the McDonald's parking lot at the intersection of Parker and Main Street. If you have been to Chase County HQ, that's walking distance. That's too close to home. Donna was shot while her 2 daughters watched the horror from inside the restaurant. Autopsies revealed that the deceased was 8 weeks pregnant at the time. The shooter was at large for 2 hours until he was found dead with a self-inflicted gun wound to his head. If given a proper mental stability background check, he would have failed. If given a proper background check, he would have failed. One of Donna's daughters writes, "This is a poem I wrote when I was 14 years old. My dad legally purchased a gun after being convicted with domestic violence and with a restraining order against him. Gun control would have saved my mom's life. You cannot tell me I do not know what I'm talking about, because I wish I didn't." This is her poem. 4 bullets, that's what ended it all. Before this, no one heard my cries. No one knows what I saw. That night my tears didn't dry. Getting out, seeing my dad, Mom telling us to go inside. I didn't think this would be that bad. I didn't think this would be goodbye. Hearing a loud bang, seeing people gather around, seeing that night the devil sang, it was not a peaceful sound. Lying on the street, puddles of blood surrounding, remembering the times of being beat, I felt as though I was drowning. Your gorgeous eyes were open, you were not moving. I was so broken, my heart was bruising. Seeing my sister break down, watching her boyfriend cry. I barely noticed what else was around. I think we all wanted to die. Now going through this after, with everyone knowing, just fake smiles and laughter, covering the messed up life almost glowing. People don't understand. People don't know I'm haunted. People tell me to take a stand, but they should know this isn't what I wanted. Flashbacks every day, the facts I can't deny. No matter what people say, I can't change I saw my mom die. She was 14, and then her younger sister, Eden, also watched. And this is what happens when the system fails. We put so much faith in it to protect us, and now we have learned not to trust it, we don't know where to turn. This is what happens when lawmakers prioritize their own personal wealth over the safety and well-being of their constituents. This is what happens when adamant proponents of First Amendment rights and NRA lobbyists protect their Second Amendment rights over everyone else's rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is what happens when the majority of politicians in Washington would rather hear a story like Zoe's and send meaningless thoughts and prayers than preventing it from happening in the first place. I know from personal experience that the tension in high schools, or all around the nation, is not okay. It is not okay that strategies to survive a school shooting are small talk. It is not okay that I was taught to lay down, smear my dead friends or teacher's blood on my face and body, pull the corpse on top of me, and play dead in elementary school. It is not okay that we pass security guards and police officers in the halls daily, knowing that their sole purpose for being there is to stop a mass murder. We know that they wouldn't stand a chance against an assault rifle. And out of all 435 members of the House of Representatives, Ken Buck is the largest recipient of funds from the National Rifle Association. He's accepted over $800,000, which is almost 10 times the average household income for a family in Castle Rock. Out of all 100 members of the United States Senate, Cory Gardner is the 5th largest recipient of funds from the National Rifle Association, almost $4 million. This is what happens when our representatives are constructed. Representatives like Ken Buck and Cory Gardner are no longer representative. They're liabilities. Thank you. Next question?
Sorry, my mic was off. Katie for Congress, right?
Absolutely.
All right, I think we all have probably heard of this story, but since Charles Whitman shot 17 people from a clock tower in Austin, Texas, 1,077 people have died in mass shootings in the United States. With the majority of gun owners using firearms for sport and entertainment purposes, do you believe their Second Amendment rights are more important than the 1,077 people who have lost their lives in mass shootings?
Just as I know, this comes from an 18-year-old Joseph Wormers from Parker, Colorado.
And I think that in the discourse of our conversation, we've covered the answer pretty thoroughly to this question. And I think that we've established that our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness definitely trump their rights to own any gun.
This question also comes from Dr. McDowell, a freshman at the University of Colorado Boulder. As the incumbent, or if elected, are there any policies you would be willing to compromise on with the other side? And what are you not willing to compromise on?
No, I'm not willing to compromise. There's something to be said for having moral and ethical principles, and that's protecting our community. And if there are policies and legislation that will affect that, I will not support it, hands down, absolutely not. When it comes to policies that I would not be willing to compromise on, obviously the one with concealed carry, not having training, that's something that I would not be able to support. We should always, I mean, you have to have a fishing license, for goodness sakes. Why can't we just, require people to have proper training and credentials necessary to operate a firearm. Thank you, sir.
One of the things that really surprised me last year here in Douglas County was our Board of Education paid a lobbyist to lobby on our behalf to allow concealed carry firearms on school grounds by anyone at all with a concealed carry permit. And that is something that I absolutely would not compromise on in any form at the State Board of Education. A concealed carry license should not allow you to carry a firearm onto school grounds ever, period. I'm very sorry, I have to get going. I'm headed up to Logan County, which is about a 2.5-hour drive, and I need to get up there. I'm already a few minutes late. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm sorry that
Meeting town hall's probably gonna run about 15 minutes over, just so everyone knows, Karen. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about that word compromise. I think that's a big problem that we have with so many of our elected officials is compromise and collaboration are not the same thing. And we absolutely need more people that are willing to hold their ground, have a backbone, and say enough is enough. And that's what we're lacking, especially in our representative, Mr. Kenbach. He is not willing to stand up for the values and have enough integrity and enough responsibility to do what's right. And we need more people from regular walks of life, more moms, more members of Moms Demand Action that are going to stand up and have the backbone to say, this is the line. And as a person in medicine, we were trained above all, do no harm. And that's my guiding principle when I look at being an elected official. How can I look at this policy or this new law and think, are we doing harm or are we moving forward and doing good for the country? And we need more people that are willing to stand up and be that strong.
So basically I found this comment and I found it funny, but not funny at the same time because it's absolutely the truth. And gun shows are just Tupperware parties for criminals because they're such a significant portion of loopholes in the federal and in the state laws governing the sale and the person-to-person transfer and sale of firearms that goes on at gun shows, that you can go into a gun show and if you do a person-to-person transfer of a firearm, you get a firearm with absolutely zero background check, no background check at all. And that's available at almost every gun show you go to. So I think we need to pass laws to close these gun show and these person-to-person transfer loopholes that exist in our legislation today.
This question comes from 18-year-old Joe Wormers, and he asks, with gun ownership being a staple and tradition in American history, how would you go about implementing any restrictions on the Second Amendment?
Well, I think we've all talked about and we all agree that we do have bipartisan support on a lot of these issues. With regards to weapons of war, I think we all agree that we don't need to have AR-15, but we can still have a handgun to protect our family, our property, and other things that are important to us. We don't, so that would be a way, in terms of restrictions on the Second Amendment. To me, it's not really a restriction, we're just clarifying. And again, it's only recently that the Second Amendment has even meant an individual right to firearms. So, I do believe that compromise, collaboration, whatever you want to call it, it's hard to get 70% of people to agree on anything, right? So if we have Fox News telling us that 90% of people agree, then there are people on the other side of the aisle that we can work with, and that's how we're going to go about effecting positive change.
I think I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a family where firearm ownership was part of that tradition. And anyone who owns a firearm knows that the first thing as a responsible gun owner is firearm safety. You'll never hear me talk about gun control. You'll never hear me talk about taking away rights or restricting in these sorts of ways. We already have laws in place that do restrict some aspects of firearms. And so one of the things that I'm working on doing is a 64-county exploratory listening tour, talking to people who may not necessarily support me outright because of perhaps differences on things like this, and actually listening to them and explaining to them and helping them really understand it needs to be bipartisan, and we are not talking about taking away guns necessarily. We are talking about being responsible gun owners, and anyone who is a responsible gun owner, values firearm safety. So one of the things I would encourage you to do, we heard it actually earlier today from someone else, is really change the rhetoric around that and let people know that you're open to these discussions and that yes, we want these things and they're common sense sort of gun safety measures and not necessarily the gun controls, and then it doesn't have to conflict with the Second Amendment.
I think that's a great point. I want to say thank you guys again, and we're starting to wrap up here, and if you hang out, you might be able to mingle with the candidates. I think we've established a major problematic factor with respect to every firearm accident, suicide, murder, accidental shootings, is basic unregulated access to firearms and ammunition. And with respect to the Second Amendment, it doesn't say that we're not allowed to regulate access to firearms and ammunition. It just says we need a well-regulated militia to defend our nation. So we have significant regulations on what kind of fertilizers you can purchase. So why not firearms? Yeah, and then we came up with this list of why should we not have these things, and it just makes sense if if we can't think of a reason why we shouldn't have these reasonable restrictions, then I think we should start putting them in place to protect our society.
I would like to conclude just on behalf of young people and students, because I feel as though the majority of students and young people have just now begun to listen to. But that has not been the case for me, and that's why I'm standing today. And for this, I have many people to thank, adults who understand the value of a young person's perspective. First, I'd like to thank Anna Kelly, Abby Wassell, and Lily Adams from the Democratic Colorado Coordinating Campaign. They hired me for my first internship in politics, even though I had zero experience, but a lot of passion. I'd like to thank Howard Cho and Brittany Bilala for reaching out to me with opportunities to make a real difference. And then, last but not least, everybody who I'm working with right now for Chase County for Congress, Nick Land, Meg Brown, and Chase himself. Never on a campaign or in any other job have I felt so respected and listened to, like I have a voice that matters. And I think that this is a universal struggle among young people. We feel like adults are constantly telling us that we are old enough to have developed our own opinions, speaking to us really condescendingly, and brushing off any input that we are able to provide, while still claiming that children are the future. And I'd like to thank everybody who I worked with organizing this, everybody I'm working with now, and everybody I've worked with in the past for giving me that voice. And I am more appreciative than you will ever know. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to look to your left and right and introduce yourself, exchange information, collaborate, cooperate, work together, come up here and meet the candidates.